Good afternoon and welcome to our Cool and Connected webinar. This is a conversation we'll have today at the intersection of broadband access and downtown revitalization. I'm John Robert Smith, Senior Policy Advisor to Smart Growth America, and I am pleased to be joined this afternoon by our federal partner and friend, Ed Finley, United States Environmental Protection Agency Office of Sustainable Communities, and our two presenters, J.D. Bennett, Community Development Director, Zanesville, Ohio, and Elaine Abbott, City Manager of Eastport, Maine. For those on the call, we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. There's a box where you can type your questions in for us. We'll compile those and attempt to answer them as the webinar completes. Ed, tell us how Cool and Connected came to be, how it's funded, and the reach of the program thus far.
Happy to, John Robert, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the federal partners of the Cool and Connected program, we're really excited to be here, and I'll tell you how this came about. So we at EPA and our partners at the USDA Rural Utilities Service and our partners at the Appalachian Regional Commission, each of our agencies does a little bit of a different sort of thing, but we all have common ground in that our agencies want to support small towns, we want to support their development, and in particular, we want to support development that is smart and sustainable and environmentally friendly. So we came together and sponsored this work a couple years ago because we saw in particular the emerging importance of broadband. And we also saw the emerging importance of small towns creating a great place and revitalizing their downtown. So on the broadband side, USDA Rural Utilities Service has a particular interest in getting Americans connected and using the internet as a means to participating in the modern economy. And not only supports infrastructure work, but once that infrastructure is in place, you know, USDA and others want to see people using it. So we saw the importance of that, of broadband, and we also saw that it's not sufficient just to have the capability to get residents and businesses to, you know, able to use broadband service. We saw that you actually do have to use it. But the exciting part of it is we also saw small towns and some not so small towns using broadband in a way that was strategic and smart and overlapped with efforts to create a place. And that's what this effort really is about. Cool and Connected, meaning a place where people want to be, but a place where people can you know, connect to the broader economy, which is, you know, really as much as anything these days a digital economy. So EPA, USDA, and ARC, we together pooled our resources. We partnered with Smart Growth America, John Robert and his colleagues who have expertise in smart development. And then we asked communities around the country, are you interested in the intersection of Main Street development and broadband service? And we picked 22 communities to work with, 2 of which we have great representatives here today to tell their story. So in addition to the stars at Smart Growth America, we've got a couple great stars in the form of Jay Bennett and Elaine Abbott, who are very smart and capable administrators in their towns. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. On behalf of EPA, USDA, and ARC, we're proud and excited about the work in partnering with these small towns, and are just excited to hear others' experiences and kind of build the body of knowledge and how broadband can serve people, can serve businesses, but again in a way that helps downtowns, helps create a place, and you know, creates those thriving communities.
Great, thank you, Ed, and thank you for your support of the work we do in our smaller cities and towns across America. One thing I did not mention in my self-introduction to you is that I have served in local government for 20 years, 16 years as the mayor of my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi, a small city in the deep South. And I want you to think about how your town center developed over the years. Generally, we developed around natural resources or one big employer. In Meridian's case, it was the railroad. And we built compact cities that were walkable because we had to be able to walk to work, walk to school, walk to the corner grocery store. Built on a nice grid system that actually we have used ever since there has been a civilization. Then in the mid-20th century, things changed. With the proliferation of automobiles after World War II and the building of the interstate highway system, we turned away from compact towns and cities, and we turned to sprawl and created places that were no longer walkable without sidewalks. Then, as big employers began to leave and industries like coal, paper mills, and the railroads declined, we see that small towns are once again turning back to the downtown they once abandoned to create a sense of place and a resurgence of their local economy based around that downtown place that has resonated with their residents for decades. In this new economy, more businesses rely on the internet, and then people can work remotely. Retirees and millennials alike, the two largest generations, are looking for places to relocate that are walkable and outside of big cities. They can bring their existing businesses, their remote jobs with them, but they need to have reliable broadband access to be connected to this nation's greater economy and to their families that may be spread in other parts of this nation's center. I want to turn to our first presenter, Elaine Abbott, City Manager of Eastport, Maine. I've had the opportunity to visit Eastport as part of the technical assistance team. It's a lovely small town with a beautiful historic center located on the most northeastern point that I think you can go and still be in the United States. Elaine, tell us about Eastport.
Thank you, John Robert, and I want to say I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about Eastport and to hear about Zanesville. My name is Elaine Abbott. I've been the City Manager of Eastport, Maine since 2014, and it is a very beautiful community, and so I'm looking forward to sharing with everyone information about it. So if you want to go to the next slide. Eastport is located 7 miles off of U.S. Route 1. It's comprised of islands, and Eastport residents live on Moose and Carlo Islands. Eastport is easily accessible by car due to a causeway that was built in the 1930s, but being located so far off the highway does create challenges. Next slide. Eastport has approximately 1,300 year-round residents with another 400 seasonal residents. It's a very tightly knit community where literally everyone knows your name. Next slide. Across Passamaquoddy Bay is New Brunswick, Canada. In this photo of Eastport, you can see various Canadian islands in the distance. We do experience difficulty with visitors being unable to use their handheld devices due to the Canadian cell phone tower across the bay. Visitors to Eastport need to remain connected and not have to pay for international phone service while they're here. Next slide. In Eastport, commercial fishing coexists quite happily with a community of artists. Next slide. Eastport is also home to the deepest natural seaport in the United States, and it's the closest U.S. cargo terminal to European markets. Next slide. Eastport loves to celebrate, and we are known for our 4 major festivals a year. 4th of July in Eastport lasts for an entire week. The Salmon and Seafood Festival in the fall, and then the Pirate Festival in September, and New Year's Eve. And because we are so close to Canada, we get to celebrate New Year's Eve twice, once for Atlantic time and once for Eastern time. Next slide. Eastport offers its residents services found in much larger cities, including 24/7 police, fire, and ambulance protection, as well as a full-service health center, a nursing home, assisted living facilities. We also have an elementary and a high school, parks, playgrounds, open spaces, beaches. Eastport really does have it all. Next slide. Eastport is 1 in a million with amenities, high quality of life, low cost of living, arts and culture, gorgeous scenery, and even the occasional blue lobster. Next slide. But the question is, how can we attract new residents to our beautiful island? Next slide. Approximately 75% of Eastport's population is 50 and older, with millennials and Gen Z accounting for only 24% combined. It is very clear that Eastport needs more young families. Next slide. But with little industry, how do we attract new residents? We need residents to bring their employment with them. We discovered that Eastport has a fairly sizable telecommuting population. We organized a focus group to learn how the telecommuters learned about Eastport and why they decided to live here instead of anywhere else in the world. Next slide. We reached out for assistance through the Cool and Connected program for guidance on community-driven strategies for leveraging broadband. Next slide. Before our two-day workshop with Smart Growth America, EPA, and USDA, several conference calls were held with stakeholders in our community and economic development. We provided information about our community's strengths and challenges, as well as our desire to drive job and population growth. Together, we created a vision statement to help guide our efforts during the two-day workshop. Next slide. I'll keep going. I can't see anything, so I'll just keep going. After walking much of Eastport, we gave our Cool and Connected partners an island tour in the 1947 Woody before we got down to work. Next slide. In order to stay relevant and at the top of search engines, we're supplying fresh content to our brand new telecommuting website. Next slide. We're looking for a great location for a non-computer game center for children and a co-working space which will also serve for computer literacy classes. We've added a downtown hotspot so our residents and our visitors can stay connected without international roaming fees. Next slide. This spring, Eastport will install its very first EV charging station. Next slide. Working with our Cool and Connected partners has given our community a renewed sense of energy and excitement, as well as reaffirming the direction we've been heading. Our Cool and Connected partners allowed us to see our community with a different set of eyes, to see what our visitors see when they come to Eastport, what works and what doesn't. I wish every community could have the opportunity we were given, support and direction on community-driven strategies for the sustainability, livability, and marketability of our beautiful island home.
Elaine, thank you for sharing your story of Eastport and the lovely visual images, and I can tell those who have not been there, Eastport looks just like that. Those aren't Chamber of Commerce photos. That's the real Eastport you're seeing. So, Elaine, again, thank you for sharing your hope of vibrancy and your appreciation of sometimes you have to have a different set of eyes to really see that which has been around you all of your life. And to further that discussion, we want to turn to Zanesville, Ohio. Now, I did not get to make the part of the team to visit Zanesville, but I've talked to my colleagues that did, and they found a community there with great promise, willing to open its eyes and perhaps see Zanesville and its future in a way they had not envisioned it before. And a part of that fresh vision was being brought by Community Development Director J.D. Bennett. Jay, talk to us about Zanesville.
Well, thank you, John, very, very much. I would first like to start off by saying hello to everybody attending today, but also to my friends at Smart Growth. That's not fair putting me after Elaine. That's just not fair that I have to follow that kind of act. So, Elaine, if I was a little younger, like significantly younger, I would be moving to East Point. So that said, I'm not young enough to move there, so I'll stay in Zanesville and be Community Development Director. Next slide, please. So Zanesville, Ohio, as you see, sits in the southeastern part of the state of Ohio. It is the seat of Muskingum County. Was the Ohio capital in 1808 for 2 years. How about that? Long history, not unlike many, many other Midwestern Appalachian communities around manufacturing, and specifically here in this region was pottery. It was known as the Clay City, the pottery capital of the world. We had many, many in the late 1800s and early 1900s, many pottery manufacturers, the Great Mosaic Tile, the Weller pottery, so known for it. And then, not unlike others, the decline happened in the mid-1900s with the loss of manufacturing. We are a river community. We have the Wye Bridge, which has two rivers, the Licking River and the Muskingum River, coming together at the confluence here in Zanesville that travels south into the Ohio River. So the river was a big part of Zanesville's early part of its development and use, and then that changed as kind of things changed. The urban core, as Elaine touched upon and John touched upon, is kind of the sprawl to the green fields and the inner cities decay, and that's kind of what happened in the late 1980s, 1990s, and still some of that is happening today. You see the population of 1950s is 40,500 at its heyday, and we are now at 25,400. So not like a lot of other small Midwestern communities with loss of population and a transitioning economy around it. My history a little bit is community development and public service director. I wear two hats. That's why I don't have a whole lot of hair. This is home for me. I came home in the mid-1980s to work in local government, became appointed as the public service, and then added the duties of community development director in the late 1990s. Served under the mayor until 2001, at which time I thought my next logical progression in my career was kind of more of an administrator type role. So I went west. It was a good time in my life to do that. My sons grew up, so I went on walkabout for 14 years to Pacific Northwest in Oregon, and then ultimately up into Washington State for the last 11 years until 2014, when the now mayor called me home and asked me to resume my position as Public Service and Development Director. So it was with that background on the West Coast, and especially in the Puget Sound area, where technology, those investments happening, you can imagine with Amazon and Boeing and Google, and it's just a way of life. So being exposed to that for 15 years and understanding and seeing the economics around it and how it became part of the culture, and then coming home to my hometown 14 and a half years later. Next slide, please. So one of the things in coming back in 2014 and getting my feet on the ground and seeing, kind of the charge of how to re-energize the urban core, we saw the advertisement for Cool and Connected, and it was a very easy application, very simple. We appreciated that as a small community with staff, in many cases, one deep. So we submitted and found out a few months later that we were selected, and we were chosen as kind of the announcement. Co-Chair Gould came out, and we kind of had a big event here in our community announcing the awards and then discussing. And Earl asked the question, why did we submit the Cool and Connected grant application? Next slide. And I replied, when you look at our downtown, we have a large downtown at 33 blocks of downtown, and you had seen a lot of decay and the abandonment of buildings. It was time to work on revitalization of the urban core. Next slide. This is the external hard drive as city government. When I returned in 2014, this was our network for city government. The public had no access to their city government. We were not networked. It became a requirement, an urgency, and we have since made great strides in providing access to the government. Next slide. I replied, you know, the economy in Zanesville, and this was a report produced by the Greater Ohio Policy Center, and it was titled From Akron to Zanesville, Small, Mid-Sized Cities Faring. You look at the Zanesville and Muskingum County compared to the rest of the state as far as median income, and this whole technology boom was happening, and if we did not get involved in it and get in front of it, we would be left behind again. Next slide. You look at the impact of what the Internet of Things are going to be doing over the next several years, and again, as part of the city and leadership within the city and partner with the county, we have a port authority that does a lot of our economic development work, and the economy, the needs of jobs around this was not relevant here at the time in 2014. It is much more relevant today. Next slide. And lastly, that's my grandson, Owen. I returned home because of him and having him as part of my world. And what I knew was that our children in Appalachia are not connected, as I saw in the Pacific Northwest and other larger communities around the country. And he deserves every chance, all of our kids deserve every chance to understand and be connected and compete on a global space. So that was the answers I replied to Earl. Next slide. So first things first, you always ask the mayor, the boss, can we go down this road? Next slide. In 2016, we created our first comprehensive plan, something out in the Pacific Northwest. Certainly you're required to do planning documents, not so much in Ohio, but brought that back. We went through a whole series, about a year and a half of planning with our community members, and created our first comprehensive plan, of which broadband and technology is one of the major focuses within some of the elements. Next slide. After the award, we developed our team. We conducted or had 3 calls with the Smart Growth team and the federal staff. We had downtown stakeholders. There was significant staff time involved with info gathering and logistical work in preparation for the workshop. Next slide. In December 6th and 7th, 2016, we hosted the teams from the federal and state agencies, Smart Growth America, Broadband Catalyst, doing the work on the broadband side for a 2-day site visit. Next slide. Day one, there were a tour of downtown area, kind of giving our visitors a lay of the land, if you will, which was very, very beneficial. They got a feel for our community and some of the spaces and some of the opportunities, some of the strengths to build off of. This was very, very key. Second part of the first day was the planning assistance team conducted interviews with key community stakeholders, Q&A sessions, about 15 minutes or so with teams. Again, creating an evaluation of our strengths as they developed, and coming out the backside of our event was the ability to put together a meaningful plan for us and this information. And then later that night was a presentation to the community in an open house format. Next slide. Day two was our stakeholder workshop. stakeholders in, going through work with all the federal and Smart Growth America team and broadband, and to create an overarching vision with specific goals and action items. Next slide. This was the Zanesville's workshop vision that was created through the work, the 2-day work that the community and the stakeholders in the downtown area signed off on. And I think it recognizes our past, it recognizes the amount of influx we have in our downtown with art and culture. There is a bustling economy around it. Tourism is up. And we see broadband as a huge component to further that investment. Next slide. This is a couple of the action plan steps. You see surveying of existing assets. You see secure funding for upfront infrastructure installation costs, create place-based incentives to lure new businesses. So these are all things that are set out to do, and who are the responsible parties. This is part of a larger plan. Next slide. What we got is outstanding technical assistance, a short-range plan. It was catalytic for Zanesville because, again, the conversation was not on the radar. The conversation, the urgency, the tools were not on our radar. It ignited that. It was catalytic. We have new voices, leadership. We have an e-community group that is now formed. And they got a broadband champion because I raised my hand and said I would be the champion for our community. Next. And since then, we've installed a network, as talked about, a voice over IP. There was a $15,000 grant from ARC. We've created a mobile app as part of our downtown association. In partnership with the downtown, we now have a 50% design of a Wi-Fi downtown, and we have submitted and are being awarded funding for that construction in partnership with a lot of local banks and other stakeholders that are investing in that. We formed 2 downtown redevelopment districts that are going to be technology central. We formed our e-community group, and we have a draft smart downtown plan that is encompassing public services as well as business. Next slide. And then we also did I mentioned catalytic. We signed up for Intelligent Community and have gone through as a group of partners. We have the county government, the city government, we have higher ed, we have secondary education, we have our hospital, we have our another stakeholder and a provider, a service provider, are part of our e-community group. And we went through a series of questions hosted through Purdue University. And this was our result of, as a group, what we have as far as broadband connectivity, knowledge, workforce, innovation, digital access. So it all started with smart growth and our Cool and Connected funded through the federal, and it has ignited into much, much more than that. We are making investment decisions that cross sectors. So next slide. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Jay. And Jay and Lane, thank you both for really your encouraging words about change that can come to a small place if you're willing to open your ears to a new message and new words, and open your eyes to a new vision for your community. And I certainly hope that everyone on the webinar heard Jay say that he was a returning native son to Zanesville, returning with a vision for his community. It really wasn't about a vision for himself. It was a vision for what his grandson Owen would face in the decades ahead in Zanesville if he was able to find a meaningful life there for the future. I have 2 grandsons, and they invigorate my every day in the work that I do. And it's so important that we say we want to have a hometown that our children and grandchildren can grow up in and find a job and raise a family. And if we mean that, we ought to talk to them. We ought to be open to the realities of their needs for the future, and we ought to begin that planning for them today. They're counting on us, obviously. Now, you've heard these two stories, but you want to hear more stories and more success stories about Cool and Connected. I urge you to tune in to our audio stories that are on the Smart Growth America blog, where you can hear about Millinocket, Maine, another Maine city, but this one in the Mount Katahdin region, a former paper mill city built by and dependent on that mill, and how they have turned to focus on their downtown after the mill closes. And also hear the story of Erwin, Tennessee. Erwin's located in the beautiful mountains of Tennessee. Jay, they had a pottery industry there in Erwin as well, railroad town, coal industry through that area, have lost much of that, but they have seized on broadband and actually have better internet access than we do here in D.C. But they have seized on that to turn around their little downtown and to keep not only their young people, but draw other young people and boomers as well back into the town center. So listen to those two stories and then join our next webinar, Cool and Connected, Action Steps for Broadband Investment and Downtown Revitalization. That webinar will be April the 5th of this year at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So please join that webinar. Now let's go to our questions that we may have in the queue. Okay, the first question we have is, have you been able to work with your state government on these initiatives, and what do you hope to accomplish in the next 6 months? So that's to Elaine and Jay. Have you worked with your state governments? How engaged are they at the state level? Is this resonating in other places in Maine and Ohio because of your work there? Have you been able to share that story at the state level? And then what do you see ahead for the next 6 months? Give me one thing in particular you want to accomplish.
I'll jump in. What we have done is formed a regional coalition here in southeastern Ohio. So through this process also, we have linked with other communities and smaller, in many cases, village, and created this work and this space with education and information and sharing resources. So we've created that momentum in southeastern Ohio very specifically and very intentionally to talk to our state government. We are here in southeastern Ohio, Appalachia, and we as a region expect more from you. The governor's office has absolutely responded. We have the governor's office of Appalachia that has participated in those regional meetings we have. So it has opened up those doors, because ultimately the application through ARC for the broadband downtown goes through the governor's office of Appalachia. So absolutely, we're working with that and working at but more of the regional level to talk as a group rather than individuals.
All right, and this is Elaine. And we definitely are taking a regionalized approach as well. And in the county that we live in, Washington County, it is a very, very large county, and a lot of these towns are quite far apart. And a lot of these towns do look to Eastport because we really have invested so much in our downtown and in our community, and we do offer so much. So we have a tendency to be kind of like the cultural center of our county. So we also, before the Cool and Connected grant, technical assistance grant was awarded to us, I had just finished a process on the state level, which was a grant called the Connect Me Authority Grant, which was for broadband planning. So the state is very interested in all we're accomplishing, because they have also made an investment in our planning and implementation of broadband initiatives. And as far as in the next 6 months, we have been working very hard on And while this doesn't have a lot to do with broadband, it does have a lot to do with livability and trying to get people to relocate here. And that would be an extension of a bike and walking sort of trail between the Pleasant Point, that's where the Native American reservation is, and Eastport, so along the causeway and out to US Route 1. So that is something that's going to take a lot of work, and earlier we were talking to our Smart Growth America partners, and we were discussing the kind of roadblocks that we are running into, but we're not giving up, and so we will be meeting on that and working on getting that done in conjunction with the Passamaquoddy tribe. So I hope that helps to answer the question as well.
Yes, thank you, Elaine. It does. I want to remind you there is a box where you can type in questions if you have them, and we'll answer those. And I'm going to turn to my colleague, Jerry Rosenberg, who actually is on the computer where the questions are coming in, and get Jerry to read out the next question.
This question is actually directed to our federal partner, Ed. When are the grant windows open for either this project or other programs like it?
I wish very soon. But actually, we do not have the resources available right now to sponsor another round. So as of now, I'm sorry to say we do not have any opportunities to offer to communities to partner under the program, but we staff are ready and willing if and when any one of our sponsoring agencies is able to identify and allocate the resources. We'll be back in action. The best way to stay tuned and to know if we are able to secure those resources is to subscribe to the EPA Smart Growth Listserv. So that's the office I work in, the EPA Office of Sustainable Communities. If you just Google EPA Smart Growth, or if you just look on the webinar slides, you'll see our office name. If you just Google that, you'll see we have a listserv. We won't spam you, but if we do have any availability of technical assistance under the Cool and Connected program or any of our other programs, we'll let you know.
Great, thank you, Ed. We have a question for Jay, specifically concerning the 20-block ARC grant-funded Wi-Fi project. Is the city maintaining ownership of that network after its construction? And if so, how is that funded and operated? As a nonprofit, a utility department, or whatever form it's in?
Yeah, what we've done, our research is, yes, the city will maintain ownership of the infrastructure. We are partnering and have a contract with a provider. So we will be dealing with our electric company. We have agreements with them to place the receivers and transmitters on the poles. The city already has invested in conduits under the sidewalks. So we have the space. We're partnering with our provider to access a third-party fiber provider that will, extend and light up. But ultimately, it is a provider show. We'll have the agreement with them specifies that it's their customers. They have a right to sell those services. The city gets money back through the agreement to put in for escrow for equipment maintenance and things of that nature.
Thank you so much, Jay. We also have a question about a building in Boulder, Colorado, which had cheaper internet by having groups buy in. I think the question is this happening in other places? Can other places do this? And I think the answer is it depends on your state. In some states, they are actively coming out with laws against having basically internet as a public utility or as a community partnership, which has been happening quite a lot, specifically in the Northeast. I know that there are a couple towns in Massachusetts that have done this. There are some towns in North Carolina that did this years ago, and now there are legislators coming out in North Carolina trying to make sure that this isn't possible anymore, basically so that internet providers can kind of have more leeway in the business side of things. So it's possible that it can happen where you are. It's something that probably requires some more research, maybe some talking to your state legislators, but it is definitely something worth looking into if you are looking to find a way to drive more broadband access to your town. There are also some states that have state programs, like I know Elaine talked about in Maine. They have what's called the 3-ring binder, and there is an organization actively working to strengthen this 3-ring binder that is trying to connect all these areas in Maine, including rural areas, and that are, trying to go within the state and develop partnerships between the towns. So a lot of states have things going on. Some states have things that might hurt the future of this. So it's definitely worth looking into if you're interested in trying to find a way to strengthen your broadband. Next, I'll just hand it back to John Robert to close us out.
Good. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for that wrap-up. And I don't see other questions in the queue. I did want to give both Elaine and Jay the opportunity. Were you able to answer the question about what specifically do you see is your next accomplishment within the next 6 months?
No, I'm sorry, I kind of forgot that. Our group, number one, is to execute all the agreements we've been working on in anticipation of the grant. And I think there was a question as well as how to get funded. Through the grant, certainly ARC, we're required to provide a 50% match. We've done something a little unique here through the Community Reinvestment Act. Our local lenders are required to invest in low-income communities, and we've given them a 3 or 4 page summary of how this will increase their investment into our match, will increase the amount of lending they can do, the amount of access for low-income people to employment opportunities and education. So we've kind of given them that, and they've signed on, and they're writing us checks to kind of help us make our local match. We did something a little unique when the Federal Reserve came out and recognized broadband as an eligible use of CRA investment through lenders. We jumped on that. So heads up on that, everybody. And the other thing we'll get accomplished over the next 6 months is our e-government, e-community group, we've developed those goals for Smart Downtown, and then we've looked for those opportunities. We have 3 action items that we need to kind of create and move as part of our plan, and that is leading to a series of 2 or 3 investments that all parties are going to commit to making that will cross sectors and make us more smart, if you will.
Okay, thank you, Jay. And we're going to have the document Jay referenced, and we'll send it out with this copy of this webinar as well to you. That'll go out tomorrow. Elaine, did you have anything to add on the next 6 months part of the question?
Well, aside from really working on trying to get that walking and biking trail up and going, as I said during the slide presentation, that we are still working on organizing a nonprofit in order to have like a gaming center, youth center sort of thing, and we're also goodness, there's a lot of things in the next 6 months. One of the most exciting things, actually, that we continue to work on is just about our open spaces, and it's not just about broadband for anybody listening. As far as this program goes, our friends from Smart Growth America came and they walked most of our town, and like I said, they gave us an idea of how other people may see our downtown. And so one thing that I know is going to be coming up, and there's kind of a movement about it, is we have a big, it's not big, okay, but for Eastport it's big, parking lot downtown that one of our Smart Growth friends referred to as almost like having a gap-toothed smile. And it kind of would be better served as a green space, an open space where people can sit and enjoy their free Wi-Fi and watch the whales and seals and the bald eagles soaring overhead. So that's another initiative. We just have so many things, irons in the fire right now. It's really an amazing and energizing time to be here. Of course, it is a lot to keep up with, but that's why it is that it's so important that you have a group of people working on all of these action plan initiatives. So really, it's an awful lot of things that we have going on, and so just stay tuned.
Good, thank you, Elaine. And we do have one final question that came in. That's really a very good question. Elaine and Jay, now that you've been through the workshop, the Cool and Connected workshop, do you have policy recommendations for either the state level or the federal level? Besides, obviously, you wish you had more of the Cool and Connected out there. So what policy suggestions do you have, if any?
I guess I'll jump in. And I would like to see, Maine, we're quite lucky that our delegation in Washington is very, very supportive of expanding broadband out to rural areas of Maine. Really, I do believe that our leaders in Washington do need to get on board. The broadband or information of Internet of Things or information technology, it's not the future, it's right now. And so it does need to be funded. The grant programs need to be out there for low-income rural areas. And I do believe they need to scrape up some more money to keep the Cool and Connected program going, but that's just my opinion.
For me, it's you touched upon it earlier, that state by state they have different laws that are being enacted to, in many cases, prohibit municipal or public sector infrastructure. I just think that they should repeal those, and they should look for private public partnerships, because ultimately that's how it's going to be built. The other thing would be to continue to pursue. I'm very, very hopeful about the low orbit satellites that's kind of going through FCC authorization. I think the latency, they've made significant improvements on the latency back to the user. I think continue to explore that, because I think that's a way to get in some of the smaller, rural, more remote areas and provide broadband to people who deserve every opportunity.
Good. Thank you both. And we'll now wrap up today's webinar. And in doing so, I want to thank Jay and Elaine and the good people of Zanesville and Eastport who have allowed their challenges and exciting futures to be discussed this afternoon. I certainly want to thank Ed Findley and the team at U.S. EPA Office of Sustainable Communities. I'm John Robert Smith, and on behalf of the technical assistance teams that have been pleased to visit your communities and look forward to visiting others, I want to thank all of you on the webinar for joining us today, and remember to tune in April the 5th for the next webinar, 1:30 Eastern Time. Have a good day and a safe one. Thank you.